had anything to do with a specific terror plot. This was a guy who, at that point, the evidence that they had against him were his words, and the fact that he was openly calling for attacks on the United States, which, according to every constitutional lawyer that I've spoken to, is reprehensible but free speech. And so you have a point where the new president of the United States, who's a constitutional lawyer, members of his counterterrorism team have told the Yemeni government, their proxies there, if you don't get this guy back into a prison cell, we're going to kill him with a drone. So Nasser al-Awlaki, his father, who was an upstanding citizen, and I know him very well at this point, I've spent a lot of time with that family, travels down to Shebwa province with his wife. His wife, by the way, got her GED in the US and worked at a candy factory while he was pursuing his degrees. I mean, it's a sort of interesting personal story that they have. He goes down there to meet with his son, and he says to Anwar, you know, they're going to kill you if you don't come back to Sana'a. And he sort of says to his dad, what, are you working for the Americans now? You know, you're my father, and you're telling me that you want me to go and surrender. And the dad says, but I just want you to live. I don't want them to kill you, and we can figure out a different way to resolve this. And Anwar says something to the effect of, I'm not going to allow the Americans to tell me which way to position my bed at night. You know, I was born free, I'm going to die free. And that was the last time that Nasser al-Awlaki spoke to his son. And so Anwar al-Awlaki is underground. He starts a blog called Imam Anwar's blog, and the internet becomes his mosque. And he's celebrating the victory of the Islamic Courts Union in Somalia, overthrowing the CIA's warlords. And he's celebrating Palestinian resistance attacks against Israelis. And he's calling for US troops to be attacked by Afghan Mujahideen and the Taliban. And is becoming more and more open in his allegiance to the armed struggle against the United States. In November of 2009, a young army psychiatrist named Major Nidal Hassan opens fire on his fellow soldiers in Fort Hood, Texas, and massacres more than a dozen soldiers and wounds many others. And it emerged, Nidal Hassan is an interesting story. Nidal Hassan was an army psychiatrist who had been interviewing or treating soldiers that were coming back from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and hearing all their stories. And he had actually tried to get his fellow soldiers that he was seeing as they were his patients, he wanted them prosecuted for war crimes and started writing this up the chain of command. I don't know if any of you know this about Nidal Hassan. So he had filed these reports and was saying that he wanted them to be court-martialed and that they were guilty of war crimes for things that they had told him. But after he committed this massacre, it emerged that he had been in email contact with Anwar al-Awlaki. And the story then that went out in the press, and that endures to this day, it still continues to be reported, is that al-Awlaki was involved with the planning of the Fort Hood massacre. You can Google it later and see it. There are still people that claim Anwar al-Awlaki was behind that massacre. His emails were intercepted by US intelligence, the emails between the two of them, and have since been declassified. And I quote extensively from the emails. Nidal Hassan was basically kind of like a pathetic stalker and was sending these bizarre emails to Anwar al-Awlaki saying, I want to award you a $5,000 prize for all of your work. I want to have an essay contest in your name. Who can write the best essay about Anwar al-Awlaki? At one point, he asked him to help him find a Muslim wife in Yemen. And al-Awlaki sort of says at one point, I'll keep an eye out for a brother. Like he's like a. So al-Awlaki, only responds a couple of times. Basically, it's just sort of saying, kind of get lost. But says it in a polite way. It says, I don't want the $5,000 given to orphans. But still, it endures this sort of idea that Anwar al-Awlaki was involved with the Fort Hood massacre. Then, on December 25th, 2009, a deranged young guy from Nigeria, Umar Farouk Abdul-Muttalib, tries to set his underpants on fire in an airplane over Detroit, the so-called underwear bomber. And the series of events that happened between Nidal Hassan and the Fort Hood massacre and the underwear bomber sealed Anwar al-Awlaki's fate. The day after Nidal Hassan conducted that massacre, Anwar al-Awlaki wrote a blog post that said Nidal Hassan is a hero. And he said that he called on other Muslims in the US military to do exactly what Nidal Hassan did. That was the last blog post he would write. The CIA had his blog shut down. Then the underwear bomber, the attempted underwear bombing happens, and Anwar al-Awlaki says in an interview that Umar Farouk was one of his students and that he knew him, but he said, I didn't direct that operation, but I support that operation. And the person that interviewed him was this journalist named Abdullah Haider Shaya. And he did, and if you read it, he was a young Yemeni journalist. If you read it, it was a almost scathingly critical interview with Anwar al-Awlaki. This journalist says to him, "You support blowing up a civilian airliner? You know, those are people that are innocent civilians." And al-Awlaki is sort of pushed into a corner by this journalist, and he's saying, well, it would be better if it was a military aircraft, but it's asymmetric war, and the U.S. is killing our civilians. And he sort of tried to rationalize it in this interview. So I bring up this journalist.